You are listening to Inspired Caring with Michelle Magner, episode number 173. Hello, welcome to Inspired Caring. I'm your host, Michelle Magner. If you are caring for an older family member, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I bring insight, tips, inspiration, and strategies to help you care for the people that you love without losing yourself along the way. Having cared for both of my grandmothers, I've helped manage everything from hospital stays, households full of belongings, to navigating senior living and end-of-life care. And I've worked in senior living as a result of that experience, serving my residents and their families as they've been on this journey too. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this episode of Inspired Caring. So, do you want to talk about your mom?
We can talk about that. That might be podcast number 2.
This is part 2. We are talking about Lisa's mother and her transition and her living arrangements. So, what is going on with your mom? What's her situation?
It's been a summer of transitions. I will just say that. I think we're in July now, and I'm trying to declare August the month of no transitions. We'll see how that goes. So my mom is moving to a senior apartment, not an assisted living, so like a over 55 rental apartment. In a building, and she signed a lease July 1st. This has been a sort of contemplated transition for a number of years. She's been on a wait list, and she lives in the house I grew up in by herself. Still has been mowing her own lawn and taking care of the house, and that's really been her identity. And in all actuality, it was a good job for her. It was a good investment, to say this. Staying in this house and maintaining and doing all the things, has allowed her to have financial resources to do other things. But it's just, has gotten to be, a lot to take care of. And it's taken her a long time to, kind of come around to the idea that there could be other ways to spend your time, in this sort of last part of your life than taking care of a house. So there's the getting to the decision has been a lot. Her house is on the market, and that's been also a big thing. The real estate market's not what it was a few years ago. And so, there's more, showings and offers and things and negotiating, which, it's just been a number of steps in there. So, we officially have a move date for her. I'll be flying out to help her move. We have movers and lots of helpers. And so that was one of the things we learned from my dad's transition, is like, it's more than you think. So I'm laughing because she'll say things like, well, I really don't have that much stuff. And it's like, okay. Like, no, and really being able to affirm, you've done a really good job, and she has, of, paring down and getting rid of things that she doesn't need to a degree and all of that. But goodness, we could all open our drawers and our closets and our houses right now. And when you think I don't have that much stuff, I challenge you, empty out your closet and see how much stuff comes out of there. A lot more than you think it is. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the gift of moving my dad and actually having her present for that it's like, remember when we did that, how much effort that was? Like, this is going to be many times that to transition you to a smaller space. So there's, I think with that, there's, a 1,000 micro decisions, and how to hold space for our loved ones, making those kind of, more conscious choices. She's making a conscious choice, but there's a million decisions that are made or that need to be made about what stays, what goes, what fits, what gets donated, what gets sold. Every time one of the grandkids comes over, there's do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? And, you probably know of that too. And sometimes it's easier to say yes and take things, even if you really don't want them.
Right.
So it's kind of like how to balance out, like, no, mom, like I'm trying to get rid of my things. Like, I don't need your things. And like, sure, I'll take that rake. Sure, I'll take that bowl.
My father-in-law brought over a pie he had baked, which yes, my 73-year-old
Mm-hmm.
father-in-law made a pie from scratch, which is amazing. But he had the top that you put on to a crust, that they used to have in like the 50s so that the crust doesn't burn or bake,
Oh,
you know what I
yes.
mean? Anyway,
Yep,
so
yep.
he brought that over with that on top and he left the whole kit at my house. And I was like, okay.
I guess
I'll
this is mine now.
I'll take it. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
So you said
yeah,
it was kind of a long process for her to get into that headspace about a
yeah.
downsize and a move. Is there anything specific that you could think of that maybe contributed to her making that decision? Did she come to the conclusion on her own, or was it a little heat from you and
Yeah.
your brother?
Yeah, that's, I will say, a little of both. My mom has always prided herself on being independent, of keeping this house for, 25 years after my parents were divorced. And she's really, really proud of that. And I'm
Hmm.
proud of her too for doing that and maintaining it and all of that. Um, she grew up in an era where, you were valued by your work ability to work and take care of things. And so, um, some health issues have come up with her that she's managing. But, having a 3,000 square foot house with steps up to the bedrooms and, laundry in the basement. And, there were a couple little slips in the bathtub and just a few, as she says, little frisbees that got thrown her way of like, you should think about this. Um, I will say her mother, she refers back to her as, making good decisions. And her mother, lived on a farm. And, when she was at a point in her life when she was there alone, was able to make some decisions about this is too much for me and transition to something smaller until she eventually, was in a care facility. But I think that having that example of someone that says, I'm going to make some decisions about how, my things, how I'm living my life, what responsibilities I want my family members to take on or not take on. I think that has been a big influence. Um, being on a wait list for this senior apartments was great because apartments would come up and they would offer them and you could say yes or no, and then you didn't fall off the list. They just offered you whatever came up next. And so that really took off a lot of pressure. Um, she had said she always wanted to, she lives in Colorado, she always wanted to have a view of the mountains out of her window. And when an apartment came up that was facing west, so viewing the mountains, I think that was the kind of tipping point, that this came available. It was like it was like many doors were opening, and she was paying attention to like, you know, the doors opening. That was sort of a sign from the universe, if
Mm-hmm.
you will, or a higher power that this was really meant for her. And as I say that, that has not been without challenges, for sure. But I think, going back to that premise of like, this is going to be, a transition. It's going to be less work. She's telling people that she's retiring from home ownership. Somehow that
Mm.
feels good to her. Instead of saying, I can't do this anymore, I'm choosing. So I think that has been the important thing with her, is giving her autonomy and choice. And when stress has been high, she does push back a little bit on my brother, and I'm saying things like, I want to make these decisions myself. And, being able to say, you absolutely can make these decisions, and we are here to support you. And we need to get this moving forward if this is what you want to do. So it's kind of that whole idea of holding space for both, the transition into something that's maybe more manageable, but also being able to say, you've done such a good job here, Mom, taking care of yourself and this house. And, it's just an era of being a homeowner is in the past. So
Are there other thoughts as you were working to manage your own thoughts and emotions around your dad's transition to memory care? Are there specific thoughts or emotions that you have had to keep in check with this for your mother, for her transitioning from home ownership to a senior apartment?
yeah, I mean, definitely it brings up, I mean, as often situations do, they bring up things in ourselves that sometimes are surprising and sometimes not. Um, that I don't feel especially emotionally tied to, the house,
Hmm.
like she does. I think what it does bring up is just being able to pause and slow down and be with her in, it's a grief process of letting go of a place. Um, transitioning to a new social environment. I mean, I feel a little bit like sending a child off to college or even kindergarten. As a
Mm,
parent back in those days, it's like, oh, look, honey, look at all these nice new people and friends, and there's going to be so much to do. This is so exciting. And, I can look over at her and she has a little bit of a look like, oh no, like this is a lot. So I think it's like keeping that in mind that there's just a whole lot of emotion around change and transition, and we sometimes project that onto our loved ones. And being able to kind of pull back, and for me, remember, moving to a new town as a school age child, of how hard that was, showing up in a new classroom with all these new kids and a different teacher, and how what that felt like.
I
So
think
that's really taken me back to those sort of memories of like, okay, it is exciting and scary at the same time.
right. Um, there are so many correlations because, well, let me phrase it this way. Like we have these expectations of what it should look like to make these big transitions and how easy it should be. And I don't know if social media is playing into this with just how our brains are operating and are wired right now that we go to the next reel or distraction or whatever that
Mhm.
is. It's as if we should not have to sit in periods of time of grief or feeling really
Yeah.
bad or I'm not articulating this very well. I don't know. I just feel like we have this expectation that we should get over it or move through it or get past it faster than what
Yeah.
our human brains can actually do.
Absolutely. And I think it's that way with, if we're talking about transitions, I remember when I went through a divorce, somebody said to me, it's going to take X number of years until you start, you know, feeling a certain way. And I thought, that's not going to happen. And, I'm 10 years post divorce and there are still things that come up.
Mm.
They're less, but there's still, I mean, we are invested in our, relationships and our family life and all of that. I mean, somehow you're right. What was the messaging we got where it's just like, oh, you make this transition and then it's so great. You're in this new place or this new relationship or living situation, and the other doesn't matter anymore.
Right. And I think so often it's in the spirit of wanting to make someone else feel better. And
Mhm.
you already mentioned it with your dad's situation and his move. You want to feel better. Like you want to know that they are
Yeah.
in a good situation and you want to feel okay about it.
Well, and I think that's important to just like be like perfectly honest with ourselves. It's like, yes, I want you to feel better, but actually, like I want to feel better. I want to feel less stressed. I want this move to be over. because I have things that are, back burnered in order to do this. And so I don't know if there's a solution. Probably not. It's like, again, a lot of micro decisions, micro connections all along the way. And just like with my dad, for to be able to say, you're right. All of your things aren't here. To be able to say to my mom, like, you're right. It's going to be hard.
Mm.
And just being able to like sit in that moment of where it's like you want to say things to make them feel better or you feel better, and right, because the conversation could go, but there could be a but to that, like, but look at all these great things, and there's lectures and book clubs, and you can see the mountains. You always wanted to see the mountains. Isn't this great? But what people often need so much, including us, is just somebody to hold that space and go, this is hard. This is hard, or I have no words.
Yeah. And also, this is a new chapter. We are firmly closing a previous chapter, a huge chapter of her life as a
Yeah.
homeowner, a woman who raised her kids, a
Yeah.
woman who independently ran that house.
Yeah.
What's coming up for me is what kind of ceremony or rituals do we have as opposed, in
Yeah.
our culture? Like, I think
Yeah.
we're missing
Yes.
some of that when we close
Yeah.
these chapters.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you brought that up, because one of my daughters lives near my mom and has been so great with her. And she came up with this idea, which was it's not her idea, but she had heard about it. And it was about writing a love letter to your house.
Mhm.
And it just is like, and she sent an example of one, and it was like, we're both crying and all of that, but just this acknowledgement of all of the things that this physical structure housed, over many, many years, joy and sadness and grief and parties and all of the things, and being able to acknowledge that. I think that will be so valuable, as again, here's another transition of that in between, to be able to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
It seems,
Yes.
yeah.
When we
Yeah.
packed up our daughter out of her dorm after her freshman year at college, we stood in the space and thanked the space
Yeah.
just for keeping her safe and giving her a great experience. And I mean, it was an emotional roller coaster just for those 8 months in that little dorm
Yeah.
room. So just the richness and vastness of everything you just shared that we
Yeah.
experience in our homes. I love the
Yeah.
love letter idea.
I do too.
I
I
mean,
do too. And I think being able to share that, and having, for those who can attend, a family, have a little goodbye ritual, I that feels really important. And I think, as, adult children of, aging parents, it's easy to get caught up in all of the logistical things, and they're important, right? All of the legal things, and, powers of attorneys, and all of the things that are set up, and purging things you don't need, and, what are the things of the physical move. And I think if we could pause in the transitions while it's happening, just to acknowledge all of those other pieces, perhaps that'll make the transition, a little smoother.
and I don't know if we ever do get closure fully. I still am trundling back to old houses that I lived in,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
seeking something energetically from those spaces. My
Yeah.
childhood brownstone, the childhood home, the house my husband and I built together,
Mm-hmm.
um so I think that there is just an acknowledgement that there is a longing, that there's an energetic with these spaces
Yeah.
that um deserve our attention. It's just to, again, hold that space for our adult, we are also adults, but for our aging parents or family
Yeah.
members that
Yes.
having a little ceremony or ritual, or it's a big deal.
Yeah. And perhaps it's not about getting over it at all.
Mm,
I think that is part of our culture too, about, we move on, we close the chapter and all of that. But maybe it's not about getting over it or moving on. It's about how do we integrate all of these like life experiences, places, and things that help us to just become, the next version of ourself, whatever that happens to be. That feels to me, at this point in my life, like, okay, how to acknowledge all of the things that have brought us to this moment.
yeah. When does she
Yeah.
move?
Um, the movers show up on in a week and a half. So
Okay.
I'll be flying down there on Sunday this week, and we'll start packing and all of that. And I have an open-ended ticket at this moment that felt right
Hmm.
to just kind of see. And I feel like I want to be in her new space with her. And maybe that's for me, not for her, to be, you know, in the new space, to make sure things are settled, and get the new silverware organizer from IKEA. And it feels a little bit like the dorm room things, right? Like that's what we do. We want the room to be set up and the new bedspread and some of that. And so it's funny how just all of these experiences kind of come around full circle, and then we can go, oh, this feels a lot like the college transition or the kindergarten transition. And maybe if we can just look at them more as like, this is just life experiences. Like we have these different transitions, and this is another one.
Right. And it's our desire to set people up for success and for our
Yeah.
deep love and helping make things feel easier as we are preparing. We have two daughters going back to school this year, and one is moving into her very own apartment, beautiful little one-bedroom apartment, and the other one is moving into a condo. So here we are hemorrhaging money trying to
Yes.
get the couches and the beds and make sure that we have some
Mhm.
basic things. And I've really had to take stock in, this is going to have to be their experience. Like they are going to have
Yeah.
to go live these places without us, and time and money solve a lot of issues. And um, they also just need to feel what it's like to do these
Yeah.
things on their own in their own time. Even
Yeah.
if, let's say, the apartment is perfectly set up and beautifully set up, there's still going to be things that come up. There's still things that are going
Yeah.
to come up.
Yeah. And I think that's just being part of being human, right? That's part of having a human brain, right? This
Yeah.
desire to, when there's so many things that are out of control, right? How to have some control. Right. And like I could say to my mom, like, oh my gosh, like the drawer organizer from IKEA, like that's just not important.
Mm.
But in the scheme of things, to her at that moment, it's just one small thing that she can control when everything else feels out of control. I think if we can pause and acknowledge again for our children, our loved ones, ourselves, that like it's okay to
Mm.
have something that you can control when other things are seemingly so much out of your influence. So
Every, I just want to keep hearing you talk. I feel,
well, it's so lovely to talk to you. And it just is like, I mean, this is really, you and I have been talking about aging for,
4 years or something now.
longer, 4 years now,
Five
right?
years. We've
You and I met during COVID as well. And, it just is, this is one of the gifts of getting older too, is we get to help people we love, grow into a next phase of life, including ourselves. So it really is a gift. And, the work of awareness and presence and slowing down, I know for me, it's just really, really been a gift, in this time. So
I think these are the things that people really need to hear. I think these are the conversations that people are seeking, Lisa, because we have these deep, dark fears about how things are going to play out. And I just think that this has been so valuable.
yeah, yes. And I think, to add on to that, this idea of asking for help, and sometimes it takes many people saying the same thing or doing the same thing, relating this back to my mom. Her realtor has been so great. And there was a time last week where my brother made a private call to the realtor, just encouraging her to, help encourage my mom to, transition forward into her new space, that it would be okay for the house to be on the market, because my mom was so concerned that there would be nobody there to vacuum right before there was a showing or some things like that. And to really kind of, allay her fears in that. And this realtor said something so beautiful to her that she just latched onto. And, sometimes things sound different when they don't come from us, as somebody who's a little close to the situation. But she just said, Mary, I think energetically it feels like you're holding on to this house, and maybe that's keeping somebody from coming into it and buying it. And it was like that just was all she needed to hear, to give her this permission to make the transition, to this new apartment, to get some validation that it was okay. And so, again, it's in reaching out and letting people know kind of what you're struggling with and feeling, to get some help. And it really changed the situation dramatically. So now we have a plan moving forward, which feels good.
Oh my gosh,
Sure.
that is amazing. What a smart realtor, like an observant, present, um,
Yeah.
yeah, realtor. And I'm glad that your brother made that call, because I think sometimes adult children hesitate to go behind the scenes
Yeah.
or try and it's not that we're trying necessarily to manipulate the situation, the intention in a
Totally.
bad way, but we are trying to again set people up for success. And how do we move the
Yeah.
needle, and how do we influence the decision and the decision
Yeah.
makers?
Yeah. She, my mom followed up with, she says, "Do you know that your brother called the realtor?" I said, "Yes, I do. And isn't that so great that we can all help you?" And even just that, like, yes, I did know. And here's how we're gonna spin it, because it is positive. The other way to think of it could have been, well, you went behind my back and you don't trust me. And there could have been a whole narrative around that. That just is another story, right?
Mm,
They're just stories.
mm.
We get to create the one that feels best, I think.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Yes, you're welcome.
I love having you here with me
Mm,
and being on the podcast. So I hope you'll come back.
anytime, anytime,
That would be
anytime.
amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lisa.
You're so welcome, Michelle. Much love.